We'll dive in on questions in just a second. Wanted to kick things off by saying a thank you to Desmond Bane. Des, on and off the court, was a outstanding member of this team, represented this team, this city, in a way that made all of us incredibly proud. Excited for him. I think he's in a great situation in Orlando going forward. But yeah, I had a very close rapport with Des. That was I'm sure there'll be questions, about the trade itself. But yeah, before hitting on anything else, very appreciative for Des and his contributions to this team and this city. Open it up from there.
I guess we can start with that with Desmond Bane. Kind of what led to you getting to the point of trading Des and just the conversations you went through in order for that to happen?
Yeah, not a decision that we came to lightly. We really wanted to take a step back, not overreact to the end of the season, and digest where are we. The goal is the goal, which is to win a championship here in Memphis, and we reached the point where we felt like, you don't just go out and make that trade, but if there were opportunities, to build around John Jaren, with a different type of build, that was something that we decided that if there was something compelling enough with where we're trying to get to from a play style standpoint, how we're trying to build, the roster from here. Jalen's emergence, I think, is a significant, part of it that gave us some confidence as we're building out our wings going forward. And we'll of course talk more about that with our pick tonight. But I think it's a great trade for Orlando. I hope it'll be a win-win, over time. I think Des is a terrific fit, there with Franz, Paolo, Suggs. I think they've got a great opportunity, in what could be an open East next year. So difficult decision, but when we're there's different ways you could build teams, right? And at the end of the day, it's easy to sit up here and say the goal is to win a championship, but that's the goal, and there's no shortcuts, to that. Sometimes you need to take a step back, be as honest as you can be about where the team is at, and be willing to take different avenues to work towards it, and that's what we did.
Yeah, you used to tie the two transactions together. You used 2 of the 4 first-round picks from the Bane trade tonight to acquire Cedric Coward. A couple of related questions about that. Mm-hmm. One, do you think Coward can be an impact player for the team on the John Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr. timeline? And then second, how much consideration was given to reducing the assets the team had left to acquire veteran talent?
Just one, this doesn't necessarily hit on those questions. I believe, given that we have a pending trade with the league, so I'm able to talk about Cedric, the player, and that there's a pending trade. I'm not allowed to talk about the assets that are tied up in the trade. To answer your question, though, do you mind repeating it, Chris?
Well, the first part was, do you think Coward can be an impact player for the team on the John Jaren timeline?
Yep.
And then the second part, to the degree you can answer, is in doing the trade tonight, how much consideration was given to reducing the ability, mm-hmm. let's say, to acquire better talent in the future?
Yeah, I mean, John Jaren are not old. I guess I would start there. I think there's different ways that you can build towards where you're ultimately trying to get to. And I think one of the things that we acknowledged, coming out of this is that you can push in different ways. We insert in closely looking at, all of the avenues that we could pursue. I think we specifically identified Cedric, in this draft as a player that has more upside, at least than a lot of the names that get thrown around, which are not necessarily available. Most it's easy to throw out names, right? But like it's we see, and we have real belief, in Cedric, and we'll get, kind of more into him. But I think part of the rationale, for making this type of a move is the pursuit of a potential higher end outcome. We could I intimated this maybe, at the end of the season, but we do feel like we're not just like one guy away from. Are we one guy away from maybe getting a little bit further? Sure, but we for being honest with ourselves, we don't feel like we're one guy away from winning the championship next season. So with that in mind, when you're looking at the options of making this kind of a swing, pushing in these kind of an assets coming out of the Dez trade, like we would rather aim what we hope will be higher. We see, higher end outcomes of what this could be. Nothing. It's the draft. There's no certainties, in any of it. But if the goal is the goal, which is to do something, legitimately high end, when as soon as we're able to, and hopefully I'm not going to come. Too early for me to say, what's he going to do this season? What's his, he's going to come in, last season, Jalen, we thought was going to be in the G League, and he came in and earned the starting spot and ran with it. So nothing will be handed to Cedric, but he'll have every opportunity. We'll go by merit, and, whatever he deserves, he'll, is an opportunity that he'll get. To specifically answer your question, yes, I do think Cedric, from an age standpoint, absolutely could line up with John Jaren. I don't see why that would be problematic if he, is able to emerge as a difference-making, player in the coming years.
Cedric had a little bit of a unique path to get here. What did you identify as, I guess, the traits that you need on the team that he can bring, and what was the process like in scouting him?
Yeah, he's a unique prospect, a unique evaluation, obviously, given that he did not play that many games this season. But when you really certainly when you get to know the kid and see him up close and personal and get a sense of what he's made of, which everyone, we'll get to in person soon, but we see a player that is able to, there's nothing he couldn't theoretically be able to contribute to in the NBA in a real role while taking nothing off the table. We don't see some area that, would be a glaring weakness that couldn't be improved. I think there's a foundation of what could be a, very interesting, versatile, multi-positional defender who could end up playing different types of roles offensively. I think wings have different developmental pathways and can surprise you. And I'm not going to sit here and make bold proclamations about exactly what he's going to be over time, but I wouldn't put a limit, on what Cedric Coward is, capable of as he develops over time.
Hey, Zach, I know it don't get a lot of clicks, so it's not fun, but I know this team's dealt with offense over the last few years. But what are you going to do to make this team better defensively as a whole core?
Sorry, do you mind repeating?
Defensively, make this team better defensively.
I think, that this is, over time, we project Cedric to be a high, an impact defender at the NBA level. And we certainly, I think to some extent recognize that after trading Marcus, there already had been a focus on kind of building out the defensive infrastructure and seeing how the teams that, this year made, deep runs. Like, I think you can just see the versatility, the physicality. Defense is a significant, like a critical part of where I think the league is going, and having guys that can defend multiple positions. We think Cedric could be a significant, significant part of that.
It was a while ago, but the decision to make Tomas the full-time head coach, did you consider or interview other candidates, and then just what went into that decision ultimately?
Yeah, we did not interview other candidates. We, of course, as we worked through that process, and Tomas was serving for that period as the interim head coach, we evaluated, closely, how he was approaching the rest of the season with the group. Obviously, in games, behind the scenes, in practice, we were incredibly impressed by his approach, his directness, his honesty, his understanding, of the game and his vision, for where it could go and where we could go. So coming out of the season, we digested, but had a lot of confidence and conviction that, going forward was the right thing for this team.
you've dealt with injuries over the past few years, and obviously you've got to deal with Zach being out. Was there any concern as far as drafting Cedric given the shoulder situation, and what is the status of it at this point?
Yeah, no, there's a thorough medical evaluation, as there was for every draft prospect that we had access to, and those that we didn't, through the NBA. He's long-term prognosis, very good. His recovery has gone smoothly, to date. In the pre-draft process, he participated only in 1-on-0 workouts, so he has not yet progressed to contact. So that will be the next step in his return to play progression. That makes things TBD for summer league. We just drafted him tonight in a pending trade. So we have to get him in and get with the doctors, fully understand the next steps. But to answer the larger question, his long-term, medical, like we have a lot of confidence that that's not a long-term concern.
Back in the back here, I've got two, if you don't mind, one on Dez and then one on Cedric. Mm-hmm. There was a report that Dez was blindsided by the trade, but then he went on a podcast and made it sound like you guys communicated that it was at least a possibility. Was that something talked about at exit interviews with him?
Yeah, people say a lot of things on the internet nowadays. What I would say is I'll keep specific player conversations private. I believe in operating with honesty and not blindsiding guys, and I was honest, with Dez of the possibility of something that might come. As always, made a point of making sure he heard from me, as well. So I don't have much to say other than people have a lot of things to say on the internet.
On Cedric, guys played 6 games this season at relative power conference basketball level. Interesting path before that, the injury and all that. Given where the team was last season and I guess the need to make an impact right away, what gives you the confidence to take a relative gamble given his upside and what he could bring in the future?
Yeah, I honestly, I would flip it around. Like after going through the process with Cedric, seeing him up close, watching a ton of him, on film, I think it's a gamble not to be aggressive and pursue players that you think can help you achieve a higher end outcome, over time. So that's what we did here.
Zach, going back towards the trade, what are some things from those pieces that are coming in, that veteran leadership that you wanted to make sure that this group got older by bringing in KCP and Cole Anthony?
Yeah, I was had an outstanding KCP and Cole Anthony both came in. KCP is Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Kenny's someone who I think is going to be a significant part of this group. Really enjoyed, sitting down and beginning to get to know both of those guys. I think they're on court, a great fit with how we're trying to play and some of the holes, on this roster. So excited to have both Kenny and Cole join us. I think Kenny has some locker room off-court qualities that are perfect for Memphis, that are perfect for this group, right now. We're encouraged. I was very encouraged after spending some time with them. Glad that they're joining us, definitely.
Zach, so obviously you can't necessarily copy teams and make it deep in the playoffs because you got to identify competitive advantages. But just from watching the playoffs, watching the finals, is there anything in particular that stood out that may influence your player evaluation, whether it's bringing in Cedric and KCP and maybe future targets for the rest of the offseason?
Yeah, I mean, you see teams that are disciplined. You see teams that are together. You see teams that are versatile and athletic and rangy, defensively. And I think in any way that we could, kind of build out in furtherance of things that I think we tend to prioritize, generally, I think Cedric's an ideal fit.
As you look forward to the rest of the offseason here and free agency, I guess what is important, what work is there to be done, and how do you view this team from a competitive standpoint, and how far can you take them with additions that you might be able to make?
Yeah, I think as we look ahead, obviously there's some significant items to work through. Jaren, of course, a significant priority for the team. Santi as well. and we're going to continue to operate through the same lens that we have, for this move and otherwise, and continue to build this team, through the lens of putting them in a position to have the best chance to compete at the highest level.
We didn't get to ask you about Santi when we talked to you last. What's the, situation there? Would you consider him, a priority this offseason in restricted free agency?
Yeah, we think very highly of Santi. I think he's taken significant steps forward. I can't go too far into, impending free agency, but we'd certainly like to bring Santi back.
You touched on this a little bit in the answer to Drew's question, but my initial question presupposed a John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. timeline. There was some speculation after the Bane trade that was the beginning of a rebuild for the team. Just to get you on the record, is it still the franchise's intent to build the team around John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr.? And is that contingent, or how much is that contingent on contract discussions this summer?
Yes, and in terms of contract discussions with Jaren, it's certainly a high priority. I would say to come up with something that I don't think I'm allowed to go into detail at this point of things that we couldn't engage in this salary cap year. But Jaren, his growth every year would not put a ceiling on him continuing to take leaps that no one seems to expect, at times along the way. So it's a high priority, I would say, to come up with something with Jaren. But yes, to answer your first question. Thanks, everyone.